Hello YouTube, this is Kat from On the Balcony with Kat. This is going to be a bit of a different video for me. It's probably going to be a bit long, so if you're not interested in sitting through a long video, you might want to skip this one. I'm also dealing with a bit of a migraine that I've had all day, so if I look pained, that's part of it. The rest is that this is going to get a little emotional. And because it's going to get emotional, I took the opportunity to write things down so that I would get it all right. So please forgive me. I'm more than a little bit stressed at the moment. Let's see. Today I'm here to share with you a bit of what's been going on in our lives. And I get a fungus gnat in my face. Joy. My husband, up until this last Friday, worked for a company called Horizon Realty. And yes, I'm naming names at this point. At their apartment complex called Maplewood Park Apartments. His job title was maintenance technician, and he was responsible for helping to keep the property maintained and running well. Last Friday, at the end of the workday, he turned his keys in and quit his job. You see, he's been employed here for just over 15 years, and in that time, he's been under the thumb of a sociopath who has been both mentally and emotionally abusing him. Now, I know many of you at this point are probably asking why he didn't quit long before now. The problem with that is that my husband suffers from clinical depression and social anxiety disorder to an almost crippling level. The thought of making waves or even trying to find a new job would send him into such a huge panic attack that he would wind up literally shaking, collapsed, curled up on the floor, unable to even move till the panic attack subsided. Because of these disorders, he all but begged me not to intervene, either also for fear of retaliation from his supervisor and or the company. So I didn't. So for the past 15 or so years, I've had to sit by the sidelines and pretend that all was well, and smile into the face of the enemy. At this point, you've all probably figured out that something has changed, because I'm now coming publicly forward with this. Those of you who have been following my channel know about the fire that we had here a while back, and that we've been having difficulties with the situation ever since. I'm afraid at this point this video is going to get very long, so, please either bear with me or, well, skip it. When the fire happened, we were displaced from our large 2-bedroom apartment and eventually relocated into a small 1-bedroom apartment. I say eventually because we had to stay on cots in an empty vacant apartment for a while till they had some place for us to move to, instead of putting us up in a hotel like they did with the other people who were displaced, because, treating us like everyone else would be showing favoritism. Oh, by the way, the Red Cross did absolutely nothing after coming in and promising to help everyone. They stayed as long as the news cameras were on after the fire, and then they said, "Oh, sorry, we have no room for anyone," and left. That was the Red Cross. So just putting that out there. Anyhow, originally they told us that we'd be able to move back into our old apartment once the repairs were completed. Well, that obviously has changed, but that's only part of the situation. You see, when my husband first started working here, they froze our rent at the current price back then, which was a little over $600 a month. The company decided to change that policy recently after the fire, and instead of keeping employee rent frozen, they would raise it up to market value and then take a percentage off of that. Basically what that means is that our rent would be going up by roughly $200. So, and we could no longer afford to live in a 2-bedroom apartment. Oh, and they weren't going to raise his pay any to compensate, by the way. And since they had our rent frozen, there was no need to give employees pay raises over the years. So at this point, my husband, after 15 years of working here, still only makes about as much as a McDonald's employee, or made as much as a McDonald's employee. And they thought they were paying him too much, even though we can barely afford to live here now. But again, that's beside the point at this point. So, okay. Oops. Dang it. We were already in a stressful situation due to being displaced from the apartment we lived in for the past 6 or 7 years. We'd previously lived in another building on property for 8 years prior to that. So that brought us to a full 15 years living here. Having to literally throw out 9 dumpster loads of personal belongings in order to make that move didn't help the stress level any. My husband was not given any time off, by the way, to recover from all of this. He was expected to keep working. His sociopath of a supervisor also stepped up his verbal and emotional abuse of my husband during this time because things weren't going his way, and that's kind of what he does. When things bother him, he takes it out on his underlings. My husband was coming home so exhausted and emotionally drained each day that it was getting harder and harder for him to even set foot out the door each morning. He was also on call every other week, which added to the stress and anxiety because they were down a man. And the reason they were down a man was because the other previous employee rage quit just before Christmas. Because when my husband finally got a hold of him to talk to him about what had happened, he said he realized he had to quit on the spot or he would have killed the supervisor. And he has children and he didn't need to go to jail. He was serious. He came pretty close to suicide during that time when he quit. That's what this man can do. Anyway, yeah. So it was getting harder and harder for my husband to set foot out the door every morning. He was also on call every other week, which added to the stress and anxiety. By the way, I want you to know that my husband is the strongest man I've ever met. To battle through his mental illness and get up and go to work in an abusive situation every day for 15 years. His supervisor kept getting worse and worse, though. The abuse was coming more and more constant. And after my husband came home during a break and literally collapsed on the floor, sobbing, that he didn't think he could go on much longer, I finally said enough. I told him that I was going to call HR and report the abusive situation. And my husband finally gave in. I called his company HR department and explained what was going on. The person that I spoke to said that he would need to hear the complaint directly from my husband for himself, which again sent my husband into a screaming panic attack. But he managed to talk to the man and explain the situation. The man wanted to know why, of course, my husband had never reported the abuse in all of these years. And my mate did his best to fight down the panic so he could explain about how hard it is for him to confront anyone due to his mental illness. Oh, by the way, his supervisor was well aware of my husband's mental health issues before he began working here. See, we lived here before my husband got the job here. His supervisor actually pushed for about a year to try and get my husband to work here. Because that's kind of what sociopaths do. They look for victims who are broken, that they can use and abuse to fulfill some sort of need. And he saw the perfect victim in my husband, and he managed to manipulate him into applying here when he lost his job elsewhere. So he was well aware of the situation with my husband's mental health. We were told anyway that they would look into the situation, and the HR worker called the office manager and informed her of the allegations and instructed her to collect written statements from us, which she did. Then we didn't hear from them for quite a while. Of course, this made my husband's stress and anxiety go through the roof. We knew that his supervisor had to have been told about the accusations against him, but he showed no signs of it. Went on as if nothing had happened. Although his abuse did actually back off for a little bit. We later received a form letter from the HR department stating that his supervisor had been spoken with, and that if the behavior continued, to follow the proper channels and report it to the office manager. They never once during this entire time actually talked to my husband face to face. Nobody called him. Nobody asked to interview him. Nothing. They simply sent us a form letter saying it had been taken care of, and if it continued, to report it. Sadly, after one attempt to report further abuse, my husband felt that it was pointless to try, because even though the office manager is a very kind woman who does care, she doesn't fully understand what my husband has been going through, and she's actually compromised on the situation because she owes her job to his supervisor. And she actually owns property with his supervisor. So she's kind of caught between a rock and a hard place, wanting to help my husband and wanting not to cross his supervisor. And she's the one he had to report to. The one time that he actually did try to tell her that the abuse was beginning again and getting worse, she basically told him that it couldn't be as bad as he was saying it was, and that his supervisor was under the same amount of stress that he was. Not in the slightest. So, once again, my husband shut up and stopped trying to talk to her about it. This will most likely hurt us legally, but there's not much we can really do about it at this point. The abuse kept getting worse and worse, and my husband took a week off just to try and recover some of his strength. Almost as soon as he got back, his supervisor had him out doing the hardest, messiest work out in the rain as punishment. My husband came back sick, by the way. He had the flu pretty bad when he came back from his vacation. His supervisor was upset because he'd put him out again by being gone for a week. So he had him working out in the rain. for 2 to 3 days in a row. Constant pushing, constant stress, cold, wet weather, while sick. My husband still hasn't recovered entirely from that, by the way. He's still fighting the illness. Of course, he won't call it a punishment detail. If anybody says anything, he'll just say, oh no, the work needed to be done. But of course, it couldn't be done by somebody else who was healthier. Couldn't be done by him. It had to be done by my husband. But yeah. This isn't the first time he's done punishment details like this, though, when things haven't gone his way. My husband twisted his ankle a while back and was limping for quite a while. He's diabetic, so he doesn't heal as fast. His supervisor seemed to take the injury as my husband trying to get out of working very hard. And after harassing him constantly and calling him a gimp for a while, he had him hauling heavy appliances up and down stairs, and then had the gall afterwards to ask him why his leg wasn't healed yet. But that was just his way of punishing him and getting back at him for inconveniencing him. His supervisor has stated before that, he treats his subordinates as children and bullies them and harasses them because it's his way of motivating them to work as hard as he wants them to. Yeah, my husband's 44, by the way, and the other 2 employees are in their 60s. But he has to treat them like children to get them to work the way he wants them to. My husband went back to just trying to endure while we were trying to get the money together to buy some property to start our farm. But with the increased abuse and the long hours and all of the stress from being on call every other week, it wasn't long before my husband was becoming suicidally depressed again. The fact that he wouldn't let me intervene was getting to me as well, and I finally broke. I broke down and I told him that this situation wasn't just killing him, that it was killing me too. Having to watch everything that he's been going through while being unable to do anything. And my husband said, okay, that's it then. He said, I'll turn my keys in at the end of the day on Friday. I'll also pay next month's rent early in the hopes that they'll give us the extra month to move. And he did it. He actually quit his job last Friday. You know that scene from Tangled where Rapunzel is reacting to leaving the tower for the first time in her life? Yeah, that's kind of been him since he turned his keys in. Up and down. One moment elated that he's free finally. The next moment terrified that there's going to be some sort of retaliation or problem. To depressed that he had to resort to quitting because he's a very loyal man. The problem is that this company has a policy that, truthfully, I'm not really sure if it's even legal, but they have this policy. Which is why my husband turned in the rent check for the next month. You see, employees are required to sign a contract when hired in order to be hired here. And if their employment terminates for any reason, and they live on property, which we do, but they need to move off property within 3 days of termination. That's right, 3 days. He turned his keys in Friday. We should have been out Monday. This would be difficult for anybody, even in not in our situation. It's next to impossible for us to have been out by Monday with the situation that's going on here. So needless to say, we're still here. We're still in the apartment and have not yet managed to move. Yesterday, my husband's now ex-supervisor came to our door, which sent my husband into a screaming panic attack again. I answered the door. I answered through the door. I was not going to open the door to that man. I asked him what he wanted, and he was not pleased by my reaction, and he angrily stated that he had our check for us. So I had to open the door. When I opened the door, he thrust the check at me and stated that my husband needed to call the office, and then he stormed away. Okay, stress on stress. Yeah, they sent my husband's abuser up to return our rent check. My husband, of course, promptly called the office to find out what was going on, though I was pretty sure what the call was about. We were a day past move-out time, and we were still here after all. When the office answered the phone, my husband could hear his ex-supervisor ranting in the background. He'd already gotten down there by the time we called. Apparently my treatment of him at the door really pissed him off. My mate was told that due to the contract that he had signed, we needed to move out, but that he needed to talk to the regional manager first, and they needed a number that she could call him on, so he gave her my cell phone number and then hung up. Of course, this only set his depression on overdrive, so I urged him to call the suicide prevention hotline. He was told to call the local crisis prevention line and that maybe they could help him out better than the suicide line could. I don't know who the volunteer was on the suicide hotline, but they did a crappy-ass job, if you ask me. During the call, while he was talking to the suicide prevention volunteer, though, the regional manager tried to call. So, of course, he called her back immediately after getting off the phone with the hotline person. He tried to explain the situation to her and told her everything, including the fact that he had just been on the phone with a suicide prevention hotline due to all the stress and everything that was going on. He told her point blank, "We're not looking to cause any trouble. We just need more time. Could we please have another month to move out? We'll pay the full rent, and we'll be out." She wouldn't have any of it. And when I asked if I could talk to her, she flat out refused. She didn't want to talk to me at all. My husband all but begged her to give us a little extra time. Just a month. That's all. Just a month. So we could sort through the rest of our belongings, cut it down even more, and try to get out of here in one piece, emotionally and mentally. She once again refused, and even, after all of that, she only gave us until this coming Sunday to vacate the premises. And said that she was being generous at that, by the way. Even though some past employees have actually stayed longer than the 3 days, including one that I recall in the past who actually was here for, I think, 2 to 3 months after he terminated employment. But we weren't being given that because we're an embarrassment to the company, because my husband had the gall to accuse his supervisor of abuse, and they did nothing. They were just trying to get us out of here and sweep us under the rug as quickly as possible. So, that's where we're at now. There's really no way that we can be out by Sunday. So they'll most likely try to evict us. Which, we're willing to move. We're not fighting to stay here. God's almighty, we don't even want to stay here. We just need more time, and they won't give it to us. So, that's what's going on currently. And, yeah, we're not really sure what we'll do other than try to sort and cut down our belongings again as quickly as we can so that we can get out of here as fast as possible. And in the meantime, hope they can't force an eviction before we're actually ready to get out. You know, we weren't causing any trouble beyond trying to get some justice for my husband. And they couldn't even give us a month to move. So yeah, that's my update. I'm sorry to drop this on everyone, but there's probably not going to be any more videos from me for a little while. And I wanted to explain before I just disappeared. For those of you who actually watched to the end of this video, thank you. And I'm sorry. Take care, and may your lives go better than ours.